I am Jamshid Godrej, President of the Worldwide Fund for Nature in India, and I chair the board in India. I'm very pleased that we can have our first session of Nature Matters, which is a webinar series on the future of conservation in India. I'm particularly pleased that we have some extremely important and good panelists and speakers today. We have Mr. Ravi Singh, who is the Secretary General and CEO of WWF-India. We have Dr. Ashok Khosla, Chairman of Development Alternatives Group, and a long-time associate and friend of WWF, not just in India, but all over the world. We have the Honorable Justice Madan B. Lokur, who's a former judge of the Supreme Court of India and has been deeply involved with environment-related matters in his career. We have Mr. P.D. Rai, who's the former Member of Parliament from Sikkim. We have Miss Seema Arora, who's the Deputy Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry and deeply involved with environment matters and with the CII Foundation. And we have Dr. Vinod Mathur, who's the Chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority. I will just say a few words that, I think we have all realized in these last 4 months how much the well-being of the planet is interconnected with our health and with the health of the planet. And I think these times make us think a lot more about this interconnectedness between nature and what human beings have done to our planet. And I think there is no doubt in my mind that, what we have seen in these last few months of not just clean air, but also clean water and a much sort of healthier situation in our cities. But of course, we all know that once the pandemic reduces in intensity and economic activity gets back on track, that these are at risk. And so to discuss these things and to talk more about them, may I first invite Mr. Ravi Singh, who's the Secretary General and CEO of WWF-India, to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej. I trust everybody can hear me. I also like to welcome Seema Arora and Dr. V.B. Mathur. Can you hear me, Dr. Mathur and Seema?
Yes, Ravi.
Yes,
Thank you so
loud
much.
and clear.
Thank you. My apologies for the delay. Technology is always a challenge sometimes. I would just like to say that 2 major points before we start. This is a difficult time, we all know that, and through WWF-India, internally we talk a lot about our concerns, and we try to bring things together and present our work and convey our work in different ways within India. And one of the areas of discussion internally, almost from the time of March, was that we should put together a group of topics and issues leading about nature, about the issue of nature, and about how conservation should shape itself, or should be like, or should contribute to our country going ahead, going forward. So we have set up now, as a result of some intensive work and planning, a series of 10 such events starting from today and going on till about the end of November. These are about issues relating to what we're talking now, like planetary health and well-being, rivers for life, wetlands in cities, clean air, and so on and so forth. And of course, the bedrock of a lot of our work, which relates to nature, wildlife, connectivities, people, well-being of people, is very much part of this. So we will be sending invitations out to everyone on this, and we look forward to your participation. A lot of work will go into it, and a lot of people and experts will be part of these series. The second major thing I'd like to mention is that November last year, late November last year was the start of our 50th year in India. So for 50 years, our organization has been in the service of the country and has contributed in its own ways to this entire aspect of conservation of nature and of bringing about positive change. So what we will be discussing is some of the lessons and some of the concerns that we have in this journey. And we thank you and thank all of you who are participating for your support and for your backing and your understanding and your counsel from time to time. And of course, wherever we have had successes, you have shared them. We, on the point of this talk, I just very briefly mentioned that the concern of conservation organizations, scientific organizations within and outside India is that there is a linkage of loss of forests and the sort of overexploitation of wildlife to the emergence of pandemics. And every other year, well, almost every year now, since the rate of new viruses spilling out into the system has been sort of spiraling. SARS, Ebola, HIV, avian flu, swine flu, COVID-19. And while mankind has tried to manage this and tried to work on this entire area, the threat of what might lie in the future, because each cycle seems to be more virulent, more difficult, is actually growing. And some of these things that we need to highlight and bring to the fore is that if we adopt new measures, if we adopt new ways of life and conditions, and the way we are looking at different areas of change, the cost of some of these measures might well be well below 5% of what we are spending currently on the COVID emergency. So nature should be part of the solution that we are looking forward to. Nature should be part of our, our planning, our development, and the fact that biodiversity has retreated and it has not been given sufficient importance is something we need to bring forward. So this is the main area, the main message that perhaps, terminologies like deforestation, climate change, wildlife trade, and in wildlife trade, the sale of wild meat, the unsustainable agricultural practices, the expansion of this, the land use change, are some of the drivers we see as the threats for emergence of new viruses. And while we want all of us to leave a better world behind, I think we also have to start thinking in a way which is different and embed this into our future plans and policies. So this is what I have to say. This is basically setting the background of this entire thing. And, we will discuss on these matters as we go forward and look forward to it. Back to you, Jamshid.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Ravi, for that introduction. And may I now request our eminent speakers. First, Dr. Ashok Khosla. As I mentioned, he's the chairman of the Development Alternatives Group and deeply connected with the issues surrounding WWF.
Thank you, Jamshid. Yes, I would love to start by congratulating WWF-India for its 50th anniversary. I think this is a great achievement, and We wish you many more 50 years because we've got a lot of work to do. My only regret is that these occasions are very good for talking with fellow believers, people who are already on board. And anything one says, in a sense, sounds like a cliche because we've thought about these things for a lifetime. We've thought and talked about them, and anything new, brand new, is unlikely to emerge in the ears of any one of us. The real issue is, how does each one of us, right now there are 164 on this webinar, go out there and convert another 164 who do not believe in what we are doing. So right now, my biggest concern is that COVID-19 has given us an incredible opportunity. It's a crisis that is one of the greatest that humankind has faced in a long, long time, to actually be able to do that. If we believe that society, our economic practices, our consumption patterns, our production systems, our relationship with nature, with each other, with the body politic has to change, then this is actually one occasion in a century that helps us do that. So given the fact that we've really not even emerged from a massive destruction of ecosystems, of economies, of people's lives, of societies, what the novel coronavirus has done is to demonstrate the actual incredible power of nature. In this case, negative power, but nature has even more positive power. After all, it's nurtured 8-9 billion people on this planet, and it's going to be able to basically provide for all our needs and well-being if we were to treat it right. You know, even plutonium, even the most powerful substance known to human beings, is nothing compared with this COVID virus. This coronavirus, if you add up every single virus currently living on this earth, put them together, they actually are less than 1 gram. The total number of viruses added together, 1 gram has brought the entire economy of the world to a grinding halt. It's quite amazing what nature can do, and it's been pushed into the corner, and therefore it's doing things negatively to warn us, to give us a chance. Let's correct our ways. You know, the 5 kingdoms of nature basically don't seem to include human beings. The human species seems to be assigned itself the role of the 6th kingdom. And unlike the other 5 kingdoms, which know how to live with each other, which have no room for waste, which have no room for getting in the way of each other's well-being, the 6th species, the 6th kingdom, has come along and basically tried to destroy the workings of the other 5. Now, it can't go on much longer. And clearly, as I say, I know that I'm preaching to the converted, but we now have to take on responsibility, each one of us, to find the ones who are not converted. The language, the rhetoric of the powers that be has suddenly changed. They're talking about the local. They're talking about how to manage our affairs with nature. They're beginning to talk the kind of language which Mahatma Gandhi understood 100 years ago. It was everyday words for him. But today, we're talking about self-reliance, we're talking about Antodaya, you know, an economy that has been built on literally on slave labor. What we saw, thanks to this virus, was an economy that has been basically made out of exploitation of both human beings and nature, to an extreme that now we're going to have to pay huge costs to mend our ways. So all I want to say at the moment is, of course, nature matters, and everyone, of course, knows that. But what is more important right now is that that mattering of nature be understood as a way of totally resetting our economic systems, our ways of dealing with each other, and our ways of dealing with nature. The fact of the matter is, today, the reset that we've got to do, the about turn that we have to make, is about getting right away from our neoliberal economies, our neoclassical economic theories, and to be able basically to create a whole new way of working our relationships with all around us, with the cosmos, into a totally different way. So that's basically how I wanted to start, but there will be occasions to go into it.
Thank you, Ashok. Thank you very much for that, your introductory remarks. Appreciate that. May I now invite a former judge of the Supreme Court, Mr. Madan Lokur, to address us.
Yeah, thank you, Jamshed, and good evening to everybody. Well, first I would like to begin by congratulating WWF for organizing a webinar series. I think that's extremely important in the sense that we are facing difficult times. We need to look at things positively, and we need to find ways and means of moving forward. And from the discussions that are planned out in the webinar series, I'm sure we'll achieve that. I recall, a folklore where King Solomon had asked the people in his court to come out with a statement which will take care of everything, the good and the bad. And ultimately they told him that all things will come to pass. So good things will come to pass, bad things will come to pass. We've had a pandemic 100 years ago. We're having a pandemic today. I'm sure we'll get over all this. It's only a matter of time. The way I look at the problems we are facing, I look at them at two levels. One level is where we as Indians, are directly responsible for certain things that are happening in our country. For example, you have issues of development, infrastructure, and so on in Arunachal Pradesh. On one side, you have it in Maharashtra, Goa on the other side. In the north, you have it in Kashmir, Himachal. Down south, you have it in Kerala, Tamil Nadu. So we as Indians, as human beings, are responsible for some of these problems. And I think we need to discuss it, get the bureaucrats on board, get big businesses on board, get small businesses on board. There are a lot of small businesses also which are, creating a problem in terms of pollution. So all of us, really need to get together and see how we can solve the problem. And I'm sure with a group of 164 or 168, I'm sure we can reach out to a vast multitude and tell them that, listen, we are the cause of some of these problems. And if we can't solve the problems, then, well, we are asking for trouble. That is one level. The second level is more of an international level where we are, as human beings, of course, involved, but not so directly as Indian human beings, in the sense that you have issues of climate change. So all of us, all human beings across the world, are involved in issues of climate change, which lead to other different problems. You have migrations, you have locust swarms, you have hurricanes, you have floods. You have all kinds of problems that have arisen. Fires. In Australia, you've had 3 billion animals dying. in the Amazon, you've had huge problems. So all of us, as a global community, also need to think how to, solve the problems that we are facing. I think these are two levels at which we must act. And once we are able to do that, I'm sure we can bring about a change. Speaking as a person belonging to the legal fraternity, maybe about 20 years ago or 15 to 20 years ago, words like polluter pays principle, precautionary principle, intergenerational equity, they became suddenly buzzwords. But we're not hearing them now. So I think the law needs to be strengthened. And there is a movement, there are a lot of young people who are involved. The EIA notification, for example, has attracted a lot of attention, particularly from young people. So I think we need to look at the laws a little more carefully, look at it from the point of view of human well-being. Why are we having these laws? Why are we, getting into infrastructure development? Why are we doing whatever we are doing? Is it helping us? Is it helping our health? Is it helping the health of the planet? Because, well, we don't have any other home other than the planet, So we can't say that, well, let's ruin this planet and move to another planet. We can't do that. So really, when we are talking about well-being, when we are talking about health, we have to look at it not only, within our country, amongst our people, but also globally. And not only through, advocacy, discussions, talking, converting people, making them understand. And a movement like Chipko, for example, what an amazing movement it was, so-called illiterate people, but they knew much more about the environment than any one of us. So why can't we do that, And surely we can educate the bureaucrats on this, who are the ones who are the ones who make policy. So unless we discuss all this and discuss it with a broad range of people, academics, students are pretty active in this. Academics, technocrats, bureaucrats, get the laws to be implemented. Today, you have read about what has happened in Beirut. You find from the newspapers that 700 tons of ammonium nitrate are lying in a port in Chennai. What are they doing there? You have a survey in Delhi where more than 90% of the people say that they would prefer to cycle to work, but they're scared of air pollution, they're scared of road safety. So really, education, I think, is the key. Reaching out to everybody, nationally and globally, is the key. Together, I think we can bring about the change that we need to bring about, the change, not only for our health as individuals and as people, but for the health of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice Lokur. Really appreciate your very broad sweep of issues that you have highlighted. And we certainly need to continue to look for answers to the questions that you have raised. Before I invite Mr. Rai to address us, may I just remind our audience that we will be able to take questions through the chat feature on this call. So anyone who has a question, please do put it up on the chat. Our staff and others will go through the questions, and we hopefully will have time to bring up a few questions before we close today. So with that, may I now request Mr. P.D. Rai to address us. Mr. Rai, has been a member of parliament from the state of Sikkim, and former member of parliament, I should add. And of course, Sikkim being the wonderful state in the north of India with enormous amount of biodiversity is a state that we would like to keep, of course, as pristine as possible, but meeting the aspirations of its people. Mr. Rai. You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Rai.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej. And again, I join my fellow panelists in congratulating WWF for completing 50 years. May you have another the century before you, and then go on to contribute to India's development, or the development with a lot of eco-sense, as I would call it. So I'd just like to take off from where Justice Loker has already mentioned. He mentioned that we should have conversations with bureaucrats and every other crat other than politicians. And I think that was noted. So I will speak from the point of view of a politician. And I would also like to argue that I think politicians are very, very important from the point of view of making the laws of this land. And if you look at just the kind of Twitter conversation between Mr. Prakash Javadekar, our Honorable Minister, and former Union Minister, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, you will, on the subject of the EIA. And I think it's very interesting that Mr. Javadekar has also pledged, I believe, that the whole issue of the EIA would first be discussed in the Parliamentary Standing Committee with the MOEF, and then only it would come for its notification. Now, I think there is a lot of good work which politicians do, and I would like to frame it as that as part of the electoral process. I think if the whole green agenda is promoted, then there is always room for not only discussion, but there's always room in which we will be able to push for better laws, more effective processes that will bring the due process for every so-called development plan or policy. And I think this is possible if and only if we are able to centralize. And in that, the dialogue part of what you have spoken, and indeed what Dr. Khosla has already mentioned, I think it is important for us to centralize this particular aspect and say that climate change is an issue which is here and now. And that is something that we need to address. We can't get lost in issues other than, which are again very important, like say for instance unemployment, or if there is a flood, or if there is a pandemic, and if all these things happen together, then obviously there is a large amount of centralization of power. But then we should not lose that. And in that, I think this webinar series that WWF has brought about is not only timely. I think it needs a very, very wide, I would say, sorry, I think it needs to be positioned in such a way that it reaches everybody and far and wide. And so I think as we go along, and you have ensured that it goes right up till November, which means that till November, we are not going to be doing anything other than just, getting stuck in our own places. India is now going to be losing a huge amount. I mean, we are in recession, all right, but look at the amount of problems that we're going to be facing in terms of not only unemployment, people have already started sounding, I know that in Sikkim, people have already started sounding us as politicians that, look, I think we're running out of our savings. I think there is now a time in which we will have to find ways and means in which just to move from poverty to abject poverty, I think there is a need for some way in which we have to work. And so therefore, just positioning the climate issue itself is going to be that much more difficult. However, if you look at it, climate change is the single most biggest problem. Even Bill Gates has already foretold that, you know, he had already forecasted the pandemic. And now he is already saying that the next big issue on hand, and which we must not lose sight of, is the climate change. And even as we are talking, climate change has become the biggest, biggest cause of the problematic, as has already been outlined by Ravi in his opening remarks. So I would again argue that we have to use whatever resources we have in trying to centralize the thinking. Now, in this, let me just give you one small example. Just before this, about 3 years ago, we started building on the Sustainable Development Goals and saying that, can Sikkim take out a law in which we centralize the Sustainable Development Goals and embed it into the decision-making process or the planning process of the state government. A bill with extensive consultation was made, but unfortunately, in the state, it was known as the Welfare of Generations Bill 2017, but unfortunately, we could not pass it in the assembly. But the bill itself had a huge amount of consultation and a huge amount of agreement among citizens. And that is very, very important to know, that it is possible for us to build around some of the frameworks that are already there. The Sustainable Goals framework is already there. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is already there. We are just to now implement it through the processes that that we can build through a lot of discussion and dialogue. And I hope that somewhere down the line, political parties will start embracing this, because as has already been said before, that it is just that people will make politicians mindful of this if we are able to ensure that people realize how we are being pushed to the wall by not only the pandemic, but the cause of the pandemic, which is climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rai. I'm sure that Justice Lokur had no intention to leave out the politicians from the debate. And they are crucial, no doubt about it. Every political party is crucial to this process. And I'm so glad to hear that Sikkim did have a bill almost passed, but hopefully we will get that happening sometime soon. So may I now request Seema Arora.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Godrej. Thank you, Ravi. And I would also like to, thank WWF for this opportunity. A lot of the things that the other panelists have said, I completely resonate with their views. And I think coming from CII and being a part of the, having seen how businesses have actually evolved over the last 20 plus years, I have only a few thoughts to share. One, I think I also think this particular topic is really important. The session 1 that has been put out, and planetary health and human well-being, and especially the part of exploring the interconnectedness. I think it's spot on, because that is really, I think, the fundamental issue here. Whether we talk of, the regulatory regime, whether we talk of business action, whether we talk of different states, I think it's the fundamental issue is that we're not viewing issues from a systems lens. And nature has to be preserved and conserved and restored and even enhanced by using a systems lens. And that's where I think the disconnect happens, right? And that is, I think, one of the things that we need to really focus on, that any kind of action, whether it is business or regulatory or any kind of action, and even this action of bringing back growth post-COVID, are we actually doing this in a manner that we are looking at it from a systems approach, an interconnected approach? Otherwise, we end up creating another problem rather than solving the problem we actually started to solve. And that is one of the learnings, at least we have had in our work with businesses. And unfortunately, I mean, most of us have also contributed to it, because we also look at issues in a silo-based approach. So we look at air pollution, we look at nature, we look at biodiversity, or we look at climate change, but we are not always presenting to businesses also the interconnectedness of these issues, and therefore the solutions that may be feasible are also to be presented to them from a systems approach. So I think that is one fundamental thing we should try to do as we reflect, and the pandemic has given us this opportunity to actually reflect. The second thing is the whole issue of short term versus the long term. And this is very much for the business. It's for the government also, I know, but very much for the business. And I can only comment on that because I know that the measures of success of businesses are right now driven by a very quarterly kind of an approach, So a business or a business leader is actually rewarded for, what the market is saying every 3 months, right? The performance. I think this shift to a long-term approach is extremely fundamental to sustainability. And that's why we need to define new mechanisms, new systems, new matrices by which we actually measure success and outcome of business and business leaders. It's happening. I know that, globally there is the ESG movement, the environment, social governance indicators are coming. We need to internalize that much more in our country. I think we are still lagging in that. The capital markets have to catch up. And this is really very, very, very important. We have seen that in the past 20 years, there are self-enlightened businesses who have understood this. And to Dr. Khosla's point, these are the converted people. And yes, we are talking mostly to these converted people. I completely agree with him. But yes, the band has grown, though slowly. Now, even if we were to use these self-enlightened businesses and say that they should go deeper into their value chains, into their supply chains, I think we can create some transformation. So we need to really push even the self-enlightened ones, because while they are, making those large commitments when we come to climate also, net zero, etc., we also need to see that action takes place. And that involves much larger than just the company. The other thing is that, besides business action, which is very, very crucial, what are the trigger points to which business responds? And typically there are many, but 3 that I would like to highlight here. One, of course, regulation, and we talked about regulation. It's very important. We know that many businesses will not act until there is regulation. So we definitely need to create regulation that is stronger, that protects our, ecosystems. But we also need to, as was mentioned, focus on enforcement. Any regulation is only as good as the enforcement. So we can have a lot of, acts, but no action, right? But that's not going to be useful. So both have to work together. Secondly, I think consumers have a big role to play. And I think here in India, we need to, and I know WWF has been doing a lot of awareness. Other organizations have been also involving. I think on this webinar itself, I noticed that the participants are from different walks of different age groups, which is very good. And I think consumer, as I say, even B2C consumers, B2B consumers, they need to be made more aware of their, ability to pull behavior change from businesses, bringing them into more sustainability practices. And I think this would drive transformation. I give one example. Government is the largest procurer. Can government actually, you know, see that how we can procure, and we have examples, successful example of the star rating, you know. So if we can do much more than just what we have done till now, if that pull is created, business will have to change behavior. They will have to come up to that level to say that we will match that. And finally, as I said earlier, the financial sector has a big role to play. So three players: the regulatory you know, ecosystem, the consumer ecosystem, and the you know, the financial ecosystem. Business needs money, and if the money is made conditional, business will have to change behavior. And I think that's something that we must push for. We must get to the central bank, we must get to the other banking and financial institutions and say, this is, we have something like the business responsibility reporting, the NBGs. Softer things are there. I think we need to push the envelope. And I think this, you know, this, again, I feel that, you know, this, when we are bringing back growth post-COVID, let us not lose this opportunity. Can we use whatever opportunity we have in terms of wherever growth is being, you know, promoted, incentivized, given certain, you know, benefits from the government, where can we inject the green lever there and saying that this is what we want out of this, because we believe this is very important. Finally, any growth that is not green is not going to be sustainable. I and you understand it. We have to make this that everybody in the country understands it, starting from the top to bottom. Tall order, but I think we have to take it forward. So this is where I'll stop. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Godrej.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you. I think, you know, industry and business have to be a part of this movement. And there was a very provocative article the other day that talked of the financial managers of the world are so worried about stranded assets in industry now that they are making eco warriors their partners. And so, I mean, it's good to see things coming around to a large extent, where even the financial industry and the banks and others realize that their own future is based on good environment and conservation practice. So with that, it brings me to our last speaker here on the seminar. I have pleasure in inviting Dr. Vinod Mathur, who is the chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, with a lot of background in this area, to address us.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej. Thank you, fellow panelists and participants. I would begin by congratulating the WWF on its 50th anniversary and for celebrating in a very grand manner by organizing a series of webinars and so appropriately titling them as Nature Matters. But having said that, I also ponder to ask myself a question: that does nature really matter? And as I look back from the experience, I have mixed feelings. Many of you would recall that way back in 2004, 16 years ago, when the tsunami struck in most parts of South Asia, in India, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, what was the major learning? The major learning was that in areas where we had kept the mangrove forest intact, the wrath, the fury, the brunt of the tsunami was minimal. But having learned that lesson in a very hard way, what have we done since then? We continue to damage, destruct, degrade our forest, including mangroves, not realizing that this tsunami can come back again and haunt us. So while we do understand that biodiversity forms the bedrock of the vast array of ecosystem services and contributes immensely to the well-being of people, yet our actions many a times are something which do not help conservation in any significant way. There have been recent assessments. Early on, it was the Millennium Ecosystem. And right now, the most cited assessment is the IBIS assessment, which talks about with very high certainty that biodiversity loss and deteriorating ecosystem services are contributing both directly and indirectly to worsening health, higher food insecurity, increasing vulnerability, lower material wealth, worsening social relations, and less freedom for choice and action. I noticed that this panel itself has been titled as Planetary Health. And I would, at this stage, like to invoke a very important concept given by a group of Swedish scientists led by Dr. Rockstrom way back in 2009, when he talked about planetary boundaries. He has tried to define that we need to operate within safe operating space, and goes on to describe what these 9 planetary boundaries could be. It could be climate change, or it is biodiversity loss, the geochemical cycles, the ocean development, land use, ozone depletion. But the worrisome part is that 4 out of these 9 perceived boundaries, we are already in the red zone. And see, there is no planet B, there is no planet, no plan B for having moved. We can send certainly a few people to Moon or Mars, but definitely there cannot be a life anywhere else apart from this Earth. So this is what is the real danger, that we are not still getting the wake-up call. And see what the current COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted. One thing which it has done so clearly is the interrelationships that exist between the wild animal health, the domestic animal health, and the human health. And I'm sure many of you have been hearing this concept of one health, that you can't just deal with health of one group with forgetting what could happen to the other 2 groups. There are, interestingly, some traction now that our country, our world should move towards one health, and agencies diverse from WHO to ICMR to various ministries, including my own Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, is talking that we must try to evolve and push a one health approach. We need to look at that human health is very, very important, but we also run the risk of infectious disease spreading on that. See, the other thing which we are now beginning to realize, that the diversity of wildlife and the wild animal species that we have needs to be very, very importantly protected and preserved. And there is a very clear evidence now coming up that if we tinker with the environment, if we don't care of our forest, then we are allowing, not that these viruses have suddenly come up in 2019 or 2020, they were always there. But what we have done is that we have increased their transfer or movement from one group to the other. And that is what is the danger part of it. And that is where we need to be very careful about that. And we need to recognize these interlinkages, that these are crucial. And colleagues and panelists have talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, these goals are very important and we need to follow them and we need to achieve them. But here again, we are working in silos. How can we try, when I look at my own environment, forest and wildlife sector, everybody says that take care of SDG 13, 14 and 15. My counter question is that why only 3? Why not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and all 17? how can we hope to achieve poverty reduction target unless we do something towards food security, unless we develop resilient communities, unless we deal with climate change? And all this would require that we invest in our natural resource, invest in our natural capital, so that societies and communities, they need to work together to understand and ensure that our consumption patterns are sustainable. Our waste handling is judicious, and we need to provide more care and concern to the environment. And definitely all of these changes would require us to behave more responsibly by accounting for and minimizing externalities. Decisions humans make today are certainly going to influence the well-being of ourselves and for others. We also want that governments need to adopt the sustainable development pathways, which need to be inclusive, green, equitable. We need to have our regulations and incentives that promote and progressively reduce and minimize and eliminate, if possible, the negative environmental impact. So with these words, I feel that this is the right moment, right opportune moment. There is a growing understanding, but we need to quickly translate it into meaningful actions. And unless we do that and do it fast, we will be confronted by these pandemic-like situations much more in greater fury and ferocity. And we should not be caught. Maybe for COVID-19, all of us were caught napping. But here is the learning for us that we need to be very careful. We need to have a risk-prepared system, and so that not only our protected areas, they will have a crucial role to play, but nature is everywhere and it needs to be respected and protected by all of us. So I'll stop here and wait for the second round of our deliberations. Thank you very much for providing these opportunities.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur, so much for raising all these issues. I think all the speakers today have raised certain critically important issues that need to be pursued. So I'm going to pretend that I'm a fairy and grant each of you a wish. So if you had one wish which you would like fulfilled, what would that be? I'll ask each of the panelists the same question and start with Ashok. Ashok, you're muted.
Sorry. My wish, Jamshed, would be that people suddenly become wise and understand their own self-interest. If you're a fairy, you are in a position to grant me that one wish.
Yes, I will. Justice Lokur.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if I had one wish, I would certainly ask for people-friendly laws. Number one, and they should be implemented. People-friendly laws should be enacted and should be implemented faithfully and sincerely. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Lokur. Seema.
So, Mr. Godrej, my wish would be that we have more community-driven actions. So people actually take responsibility for their actions and they change their behavior before asking others to change behavior. So I would really wish for that.
Yeah, that's going back to what Gandhi also said about the environment. Dr. Mathur, I believe that Mr. Rai is no longer with us now. Is that correct? Yeah, so Dr. Mathur.
If I were to have a wish, I would need a magic wand which I should be able to move and implement things. See, to me, everything is implementation. There is no dearth of policy and practices and understanding and anything, but we are not able to implement. So if we were to have a wish, I wish we should be able to implement what we already have, not wish anything more, but to implement things in hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, to Ravi. I seem to have lost.
I think Mr. Rai is on mute. He may still be there.
Is he on mute? Are you there, Mr. Rai?
I think he's out of camera, but I think he's on mute. Anyway.
Yeah. Your wish, Ravi.
My wish would be all the above, which the other panelists have said, but then that's not one wish. I think for me, the wish would be if we should give environment the same kind of priority as we are giving the economy. And we have to look for the future. Economic factors are normally being taken at a shorter term thought, maybe 5 years or 10 years or even less. So an environment by priority would obviously mean a longer way of thinking and would be better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've asked our listeners to send in questions, and we have a few, and we'll just go through them. As you know, we started 15 minutes late, so we'll go up to 6 o'clock, but hopefully a few minutes before that. So the first question is that can India include natural capital in calculating GDP of the nation? Who would like to take that on? Ashok? You're muted. Ashok, you're muted.
Again, I'm muted. Of course it can. Any type of asset can be monetized and capitalized. Nature is probably much easier to do than many others. Social issues, community, and so on are quite difficult to translate into asset value. But nature has so many things that can be quantified. Trees, the value of trees, what they can do for you to create soil, for your water systems, for your habitats, for your materials. Virtually everything in nature is in fact knowable. The scientists who deal with natural systems and ecosystem services are certainly capable of giving you at least a floor value. It may well be that they are valued even more because we haven't fully understood all the positives and negatives of natural systems. But we do know one thing, that even the most crude calculations show that ecosystem services, which now amount to somewhere around 50, 60, 70 trillion dollars a year, are actually more than the human economy. What they contribute to our lives in the form of fresh water, of clean air, and everything else, these are all ecosystem service provided. And several studies, including TEEB, including earlier studies by ecologists, show how huge this contribution is. In single sectors alone, in pharmaceuticals, in food, in various materials, the contribution is in the trillions of dollars per year. So it's an amazing amount, but economists just don't want to recognize it.
But do you see any hope that because this debate has been there for a while, but obviously not concluded, but do you see some signs that it might?
Yes, and that was pre-COVID. There is now a pretty strong movement to get the economics profession and the so-called science of economics to open up to including many of these things. I believe it's going to be a long time before they take in social and community issues. That's a little bit more downstream because a large part of our thinking is to exclude large numbers of people from our calculations. But in nature, we know that it's, as Jamshed, you were saying yourself, the cost of inaction already has been calculated to be far, far higher than to act in many areas, including climate change.
Yeah, thank you, Ashok. So Justice Lokur, there are a couple of questions to do with the way that our current laws are. One question says that in the current situation, do our laws need to be amended to incorporate major changes needed to address sustainability? And sort of an associated question with that is that can the courts sort of independently and on their own intervene in projects when they can see that the projects may do more harm than good?
Yes, thank you, Jamshed. You see, so far as laws are concerned, things change over a period of time. The Environment Protection Act, for example, is of 1986. That's what, about 30, 40 years ago. You have the Wildlife Protection Act. All these are laws created at a particular point of time, but things have changed over the years. And the laws have to keep up these changes. They cannot be stratified. So therefore, I think laws need to be looked at all over again to see how we can improve, the legal system so far as the environment is concerned, so that we have something which is, more conducive to life today and, of course, to the future. So yes, I would say that the laws have to be reworked, but reworked positively. I mean, not that you come out with some notification or some law which takes us back another 10 years. No, I'm not suggesting at all. The second thing is that can the courts on their own, intervene in some projects? Theoretically, yes, but it's a little dangerous. The reason why it is dangerous is that the courts are not equipped on their own to have the full facts. So if there is a project in some part of the country, a dam is being constructed, for example, in some part of the country, what's actually going on, the courts will not have that kind of information on their own. It is somebody who has to come and tell the court that, listen, this is one point of view that I'm representing. And of course, there would be another side, the persons who are constructing the dam, usually the government, which will put the other side of the story. And then that has to be seen in the context of the law. So if the law is weak, the person who is objecting to the construction of, say, the dam, will not be able to do anything. So both these things are, intermingled, and the court does not have that expertise to interfere on its own. That is important. On issues pertaining to environment, on some issues pertaining to environment, on some issues pertaining to the economy, perhaps no issue pertaining to foreign policy, for example, or defense. So, these are limitations that are there, inbuilt self-restraint, as we call it in the judicial parlance, judicial restraint or self-restraint that has to be exercised. Thank you.
The associated point is that the Supreme Court did set up the NGT, the National
Green Tribunal.
National
Green Tribunal,
yeah, National Green Tribunal. And of course, it's done some enormously good work, but there's also a lot of criticism to it. How would you, improve its working?
Well, with some of the reports that I have received from colleagues who have been lawyers or who are lawyers, yes, you are right. There has been some problem. The thing is that we need experts. We need experts with an open mind, including lawyers. They also have to be experts in their field. It's not only that the judges have to be experts, the lawyers have to be experts also in their field. And it is through, discussion and dialogue. Because obviously, when you go to court, there is one point of view that is represented by one party, another point of view that is represented by another party. And the court has to find out, what is the law? And does the law favor one party or does it favor the other party? So if, the parties go with half-baked information, you're going to get a half-baked judgment. If the tribunal, the National Green Tribunal or any court says that, well, I'm not going to listen to you. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. I know what the law is. You're going to get a half-baked judgment or you're going to get a judgment which is totally wrong. So that dialogue, has to be there. And both points have to be, both sides of the, issue have to be understood very, very, clearly. And only then can a decision be arrived at. Unfortunately, that's not what is happening, So very often you will have, persons filing public interest litigation with, little knowledge of what's actually going on. Or you have, the state representing its case with very little information about what's actually happening on the ground. So that's when you have the problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. That was very useful. And I hopefully be a good guide for the way that, especially, when we look at these matters. I have a sort of an associated question that I'd like Dr. Mathur and Seema to address. The question basically says that increasingly government legislative processes have been completely disassociated from public opinion. How do we address this issue? Dr. Mathur? You're muted.
So can you come again for the last part I missed?
No, basically, increasingly the government and legislative processes have been completely disassociated from public opinion. How do we address this issue?
Well, I will not, first of all, agree with that the government processes are totally dissociated with public. I'm sure all mechanisms are there in place, and we are obligated not only by law, but by practice and conviction too. I can give you my own example that now that we are looking at the biodiversity governance at the grassroots level, we are now trying to revive our biodiversity management committees, which are at the Gram Panchayat level. These are the lowest rung of governance in the country. And we are in the process of looking at how do we make a people's biodiversity register, which documents the resources and which looks at that how livelihood issues of people can be protected, can be enhanced, and at the same time resource can be. But surely this is a tall order. We definitely need to work on that. And by nature, government officials and machinery is not very much designed and trained, both mentally and through training, to work with this lowest tiers of governance. So definitely an attitudinal change is required. And we do need some good leaders and champions within the bureaucracy. And wherever they are, it's not that they are isolated and few. We do get a number of people who have done some extraordinary work with local communities. So I would not be pessimistic, but I hope that we are doing, but we need to do more.
Thank you. Seema?
So I think my perspective on this is that yes, any action, any action either by business, government needs to take into account the views of the people who are going to be affected by this action. I think the catch lies that how do you identify the people who are affected by it and bring their voice in. Many a time what happens is the voice comes of the people who may or may not be actually affected but have different types of other interests. So I think the process needs to be calibrated, but it's very difficult. But it needs to be thought through and be creative enough to bring the voices of the communities, the people who are actually impacted by whatever the new decision or whatever the new investment is going to be, and take into consideration that. And in a time-bound manner. I think the other factor that becomes a little bit of a challenge is that is it time-bound? But in the interest of time, we cannot compromise on the public opinion. I think it is not that we are trying to say that you disregard public opinion and just do the efficient way of doing it. Both have to be married together. And that's where I think the challenge lies.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. I'll come to Ravi right at the end, but Ashok started the discussion by saying that we are speaking to the converted. So the question is, how do we convince the non-converted? And I'll ask this question to all the panelists, and then we'll close the questions. Ashok? You are muted, Ashok.
I mute myself just for good discipline. I'm sorry.
Yes, it is a good discipline.
But I'm not disciplined enough to unmute myself. We had to go into enemy territory. The only way that we're going to be able to win this battle, this war of ignorance, because that's what it is to get ourselves mobilized and not feel the comfort of meetings like this as being enough. We need to go beyond that, and obviously there are allies and people like Seema in business and in Mr. Mathur in government who can open doors and who we need as allies to be in front of people. But we have this incredible opportunity that this horrible virus has given us to be able to get people's attention. And it's a very short window. It's known from past experience that whenever financial and economic breakdowns happen, people's ears pick up and they get sensitized to information that they would normally not listen to. But within a few weeks, they forget about it as soon as things return to normal again. Now, that normal is what we're going to have to fight. We can't go back to that old normal. So right now, my worry is that unless we get allies like Seema and Mr. Mathur and others, and Judge Blocher for the professional legal profession, we really need to move very fast. My worry is that within the next few weeks, the potential for getting people to listen who do not necessarily believe at the moment is going to fritter away very fast. So we need to be in a hurry.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Justice Lokur.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I agree with Dr. Khosla that we have to move very, very fast. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But how do we move fast? That is, a question which is very difficult to answer. I think, today we have excellent means of communication, whether it is social media, whether it is mobile phones, whether it is, webinars, whether it is television. I think we need to use all channels of communication that are available to us to reach out to everybody possible and tell them that these are the dangers that we are facing. are very, very obvious. The COVID-19, for example, is a very obvious danger. But still, you will see people on the road without a mask. You will still see people who are not practicing social distancing. You know, so even though you have these channels of communication, communicating the message is difficult. So we have to devise ways and means of taking both these factors into consideration. Number one, using all channels of communication that are available to us, and using and improving the manner of communication or the method of communication.
Yeah, Seema?
We have to do it very fast. Thank you.
Yeah, Seema?
Yes, I think last 2.5 decades, that's what we've been trying in CII. Of course, I think the best way to do it, there's no best way, it's not one size fits all, but one of the ways to do it, and which has been successful, I think, has been to create champions. If we take the green building movement itself, I think the initial years were very, very difficult, but we created in CII the champions who showed the way. And when you create these champions, you can also use them as the peers who will talk to the others and say, look, we have done it and it makes business sense. I think there are two parts to it. You show the risk and you say, this is troublesome if you don't do it, but you also show the opportunity. You know, businesses also react to the opportunity quite well. So I think we have to do both. We have to say, communicate the risk of not doing it. And we have to create that ecosystem which keep pushing them so that they realize that they have to manage the risk. But we have to also show the benefit and the opportunity. And then we can, really scale this up. And like I said in the beginning, really use the consumer power, because business follows what consumer wants, right? And then when consumer wants something, the money also follows. So the investor will also follow that. So I think using the power of consumer is something that we should really try and see how we can do that. Thank you, Mr. Gold.
Yeah, Dr. Mathur.
I would say we need to simplify our language. It's too jargonized for a common man to understand what we are talking. So if we could simplify that. And the second thing is the phrase that we need to start early and we need to tap them young. So the school children, the college, the university, these are the people whom we need our attention. And if we can really convert them, then that will have a transformative effect for the rest of the society.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Ravi, I'm going to bring you in now.
Thank you.
You've heard all the questions. You can comment on any of the questions or anything else that you'd like to do before we close. And as Dr. Mathur mentioned, bring in the young people, especially through the Wild Wisdom quiz.
Yes. Well, with regard to bringing everyone together and highlighting the importance and creating a greater swell of interest and support for the environment and nature, I think some of I just briefly like to comment on this. I think we need to use the support and the example of the converted side of our group. Because it is those who understand this better and those who understand the reason why they care for this are the ones who could be the allies for radiating this important message. I would say that the role of responsible organizations in doing that, role of organizations like ours, to go out and influence of creating knowledge is important. And very fundamental to the way India has risen in its positive soft power. I think the importance of making a difference between awareness and knowledge. I think there is a lot of way of creating awareness, but I think the role of organizations like ours and like others and authorities like the ones represented by Dr. Mathur, Seema, is also to go into the area of knowledge, and that is an important aspect. Technology is important, yes, but I think we should recognize the positive role of the media, which has done a great service to the environment in the recent years. I'm talking about the positive side of it, the creating of this positive role through responsible reporting. Of course, you know, going out to different states, different sectors, different levels of society, and the younger generation, these are given aspects. So I would say these are important. So this is regarding the main question. On the other side, I would just like to say that there was a discussion about SDGs, and there was discussion about the factors that are influencing us today. Those of us who have, I think, out of all this Ashok Khosla, who have observed this entire change of the discussion and the change of the dialogue, and to some extent the change, I believe that we are as humanity, the dialogue seems to be moving closer to responsibility towards the planet. Because if you see the entire conversation, that, for instance, one moved businesses from talking only about business to move to a triple bottom line, and then to CSR and a greater responsibility. This has happened in the last 10 to 12 years, at least in my country. Now, how much of this is being practiced, we have different opinions on it, but we did not have the quality of the dialogue that we are having today, and some of the changes that are taking place there as a result that we had 10 years ago, number one. Number two, on a global scale, I mean, going from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, if you see it like as a treatise or as a mathematical formula, there has been a major change towards care for the earth and for the marginalized, and greater care towards natural systems and looking after that. And going forward after 2020, I think this will sort of become stronger, and we need to be part and parcel of this. My last request to all of you is to please recognize and to support and bolster the role of India as a responsible leader in this particular sector of nature conservation and environment. Because we are, in a lot of ways, thus, we are leaders. Only thing is, of course, we have different voices and we have a lot of opinions and we argue amongst ourselves and all that. But ultimately, our requirement, our need is to make for a better country, an environmentally sustainable country, and to preserve our natural and our cultural and historical heritage. I think this aspect, all of us, converted, non-converted, we need to talk on this, that we need to take this leadership forward as we have displayed it many times in the past. And with the help of all the, I mean, the government, the judiciary, the media, and of course, citizens of this country who could take it forward. Sorry, long-winded sort of statement.
No, yeah, but that was a very good way to end our program, Ravi. Thank you very much. And I really do want to thank all our speakers and panelists for this program here today. WWF is greatly honored to have you to help us to celebrate our 50th anniversary and to really make a big difference in India, as Ravi just mentioned. I think that big goal of ours is to, of course, influence everyone to make the difference for this planet. So thank you, Ashok. Thank you, Justice Lokur. Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Thank you, Seema. Thank you, Ravi, and all the WWF staff, Sejal, and everyone else who has put this all together. And thank you to our participants and listeners who have been here with us. Thank you very much, and look forward to your joining future programs such as this. Thank you and goodbye.